This can happen to anyone at any time in our lives. We all encounter this. It is a universal human experience, yet it can feel profoundly isolating when it strikes. I'm talking about grief. Most people think of grief as something that happens only after the death of a loved one. While bereavement is certainly one of the most powerful forms of grief, it is far from the only one. Grief can emerge whenever we experience a significant loss. It could be the end of a relationship, being made redundant from a job, financial hardship or debt, a serious illness, infertility, retirement, the loss of independence through disability, moving away from a community, or even the loss of a future we had imagined for ourselves. That all can trigger grief responses. At its core, grief is the brain and body's attempt to adapt to a reality that is no longer what it expected it to be. We often think of grief as a purely emotional event, a heavy heart, a wave of sadness. But the truth is that grief is a full body, high stakes neurological process. So today we are diving deep into what happens to the brain, the mind, and the physical body when we experience significant loss. Why does grief feel so much like a physical pain? How does the brain learn to navigate a world that no longer matches the expectations? And why do we all experience this universal pain so differently? Before I'm getting properly started, let me put on a little disclaimer, because what I'm talking about might trigger strong emotions, and if you listen to this and it triggers emotions or anything in you and it's not feeling right, please seek support and help. Even if it's just talking to a person that you trust to let some stuff out, it's very important that you don't keep things bottled up. You may think, oh, they don't want to listen to me. I don't want to burden them with stuff. It's important that you get an outlet to talk about what is happening inside you. If you don't let it out, it might cause you not only mental health issues, but also physical pain and stuff. So please look after yourself. Let's first look at the neurological landscape, as in the brain in shock. To understand grief, we first have to understand that the brain is essentially a prediction machine. It thrives on patterns, routines, expectations, and attachments. When we become deeply attached to a person, a role, a lifestyle, or even a vision of our future, the brain begins to incorporate those things into its eternal model of a reality. When that person, that role, relationship, or future is suddenly gone, the brain's prediction mapping system misfires. Immediately following a major loss, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, or as I call it, the internal warning system, goes into overdrive. It responds as though something essential to your survival has been taken away. This triggers a surge of stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline, placing the body into a prolonged state of alertness. At the same time, important neurochemicals associated with bonding, reward, motivation, and emotional stability begin to fluctuate. When we lose someone we love, or when a significant part of our identity or future disappears, the brain experiences something similar to withdrawal. The routines Expectations and rewards it had become accustomed to are suddenly absent. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, decision-making and logical thinking, attempts to make sense of the disruption. This is why many people experience what is commonly called grieve brain or grief fog. If you have ever forgotten appointments, misplaced everyday items, struggled to concentrate, or felt mentally exhausted after a major loss, you are not failing. Your brain is directing most of its resources towards managing a profound state of adaptation. Next, let's look at the mind and the prediction error. Psychologically, grief is often a battle between what we know intellectually and what we feel emotionally. Neuroscientist Mary Frances O'Connor, author of The Grieving Brain, describes grief not simply as an emotion, but as a form of learning. Our brains develop deeply embedded assumptions about how life works. We assume our partner will be sitting beside us at dinner. We assume we will go to work next week. We assume our financial stability will continue. We assume our health will remain largely unchanged. When a major loss occurs, these assumptions are shattered. Have you ever reached for your phone to call someone who has passed away, only to remember they are gone? Have you ever woken up after redundancy expecting to go into work, only to realize your job no longer exists? Have you ever caught yourself planning for a future that can no longer happen? These are all examples of prediction errors. The brain's internal map says one thing, reality says another. The pain of grief is, in many ways, the friction created as the brain slowly updates its understanding of the world. And what about the physical toll when the mind speaks through the body? Because the brain remains in a prolonged state of stress, the body also pays a significant price. Because grief is not only an emotional response, it produces measurable physiological changes through the body. High levels of cortisol suppress aspects of immune functioning, leaving grieving individuals more vulnerable to infections, viruses, and illness. Stress hormones disrupt communication between the brain and digestive system. Many people experience nausea, digestive upset, appetite changes, or the familiar sensation of a pit in the stomach. Blood pressure rises, heart rate increases, blood clotting mechanisms can become more active. This helps explain why periods of intense grief are associated with increased cardiovascular strain. In extreme cases, grief can manifest as a genuine medical condition known as Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, often called broken heart syndrome. A sudden surge of stress hormones can temporarily affect the heart's ability to pump effectively, producing symptoms that closely resemble a heart attack. It is a remarkable reminder that emotional pain and physical pain are not separate experiences. They are deeply interconnected within the brain and body. And then there is the spectrum of grief. Why do we react differently? Now we arrive at one of the most important points of this discussion. No two people grieve in exactly the same way. Two people may experience the same loss and respond completely differently. One person may openly express emotion and seek support. Another may become highly productive, immerse themselves in work, or they appear emotionally unaffected. Neither response is necessarily wrong. The diversity of grief responses reflects the diversity of human brains. One reason for different reactions to grief could be the attachment wiring in the brain. Our early life experiences shape how we form attachments and how we respond when those attachments are threatened or lost. People with secure attachment patterns often feel the pain deeply while gradually integrating the loss. Those with anxious attachment styles may struggle longer because the brain finds it harder to update its internal model. Individuals with avoidant attachment styles may suppress emotional responses altogether, only for grief to emerge later through stress-related physical symptoms. Let me add here that if they bottle things up or if they keep it inside, then they might have an explosive, angry reaction at some later point. That can happen as well. Then the genetic variables could play a role as well in why people react different. Genetic differences influence how our brains regulate neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine. These variations can affect resilience, emotional regulation, and vulnerability to depression or anxiety following significant loss. And then there's the allostatic load, the full cup theory. Neuroscientists use the term allostatic load to describe the cumulative impact of stress on the brain and body. If someone is already carrying financial pressures, work stress, relationship difficulties, illness, or past trauma, a new loss may overwhelm their coping capacity. In contrast, a person with greater emotional and practical resources may be better able to absorb the impact. There is no universal timeline for grief. Every brain responds according to its unique history, biology, circumstances, and available support. Next, let's look at neuroplasticity and the path forward. If you are listening to this while navigating grief, everything we have discussed might sound overwhelming. Your brain is exhausted. Your body is under strain. Your sense of certainty may feel shattered. But neuroscience also offers hope. The brain possesses an extraordinary ability known as neuroplasticity, and we talked a lot about that in previous episodes of Exploring Brain and Mind. And neuroplasticity is the capacity to adapt, reorganize, and learn. Healing from grief does not mean forgetting what was lost. It means gradually integrating the loss into your understanding of the world. Over time, the brain creates new pathways. It learns how to carry absence while continuing to engage with life. The loss remains part of your story, but it no longer dominates every moment of your existence. Grief is not a disease to be cured. It is a deeply human process of adaptation. And adaptation is one of the things the brain does best. Conclusion is whether your grief comes from the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, financial hardship, illness, the loss of a career, or the collapse of a future you once imagined, your experience is real. The fog, fatigue, confusion, and emotional upheaval are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of a brain working hard to adapt to a changed reality. Give yourself time. Give yourself compassion. And remember that healing does not mean letting go of what mattered. It means learning how to move forward while carrying it with you. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who may need to hear it right now. And let me add that this is a very brief look at grief and loss, because there is much more to it, considering all the different emotion that someone can experience at this time: anger, denial, sadness, disappointment. There is a whole spectrum of emotions, and I'm sure there is much more to grieve that could fill even another episode of Exploring Brain and Mind. But we have come to the end of today's June episode of Exploring Brain and Mind. As said before, share it with someone who might need to hear that at this time in their lives. And if you haven't subscribed or followed yet, follow Exploring Brain and Mind on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Tune in again at a next episode. Thank you for being there. Thank you for listening.